They laughed like it was nothing, like my life was a spare room you could assign with a nod. Serena will just stay at your place a while, my father said, carving roast as if he were dividing a map. I stood up so gently the chair barely scraped. Funny, I said, I haven't lived there for 6 weeks. Silence swallowed the clink of silverware. My mother blinked hard. Then where exactly have you been staying? My name is Maya Okafor, and at 29 I had built a life brick by patient brick in Riverton, a city with glass towers that catch the sea wind and 1,000 windows where nobody looks up. My apartment in Harbor Towers was the only thing I'd ever claimed without asking permission. 12 floors up, morning light like a promise across the kitchen tile, a second-hand walnut island I sanded myself until it gleamed. Every piece of it took time. Overtime shifts, freelance campaigns, weekends I bartered for more pay instead of rest. Meanwhile, Serena, 2 years younger, louder, brighter in a way people confuse with goodness, seemed to live in a pocket of permanent rescue. It started early. In our Elmcrest house there were 4 bedrooms and 1 spotlight. Mine held a desk piled with scholarship applications, a thrifted lamp with a soft wobble, and a girl who learned to be grateful for crumbs. Serena got the rehearsals and bouquets, the last-minute costume money, the late meals kept warm. When I turned 16, my party was a lukewarm slice at home after everyone fell asleep. At her 16, they rented a venue and tied a bow on a car. I learned to swallow the ache and call it independence. It sounded noble enough to keep people comfortable. I studied marketing and digital media, stitched 3 jobs together until dawn, and graduated with bruised knuckles from knocking at every closed door. The first job came small. The second brought a sliver of a view. The third finally that key to Harbor Towers. I kept the place clean like a prayer. I believed if I curated my life carefully enough, the chaos couldn't climb 12 flights and find me. I was wrong. The door between my life and Serena's has never had a lock sturdy enough to stand. It crept in like steam beneath a door. This place is gorgeous, Serena said on her first visit, wandering from room to room with the curiosity of someone measuring. So much space for one person. Harmless words, if not for the way she lingered at the window tallying. A week later she borrowed a black dress and returned neither it nor the shoes it matched, shrugging when I noticed. You weren't using them today. Unannounced drop-ins followed. My doorman, charmed and misled, waved her through. Each visit bled into a request. Emergency cash, my laptop because hers was acting weird, my card because she forgot her wallet. Each favor was a thin thread. Together they became a rope at my throat. Then came the party I didn't attend. I returned from a weekend away to lipstick ghosts on my glasses, wine stains on the rug, a jacket I didn't recognize slung over my chair like ownership. Relax, she laughed when I called. My place is tiny and I knew you wouldn't mind. The word "knew" detonated inside me. I set boundaries over coffee, voice steady, palms damp. No entering without asking. No borrowing without permission. No guests. She rolled her eyes. We're sisters, Maya. What's yours is mine. When I held the line, she did what she always does. She rerouted to our parents. My father called with a sermon about family supports family. My mother with shaky tears. Why are you being so hard on her? She just admires your home. That night my friend Tara sat on my couch and watched Serena rifle my mail like a magpie. After Serena left, Tara turned to me. That wasn't normal. That was predatory. I tried to defend the indefensible. Then came the hurricane. I returned from a business trip, 3 days of wins and promises, to find damp towels on my bathroom floor, my skincare open and half empty, the guest blanket rumpled like a breath still warming it. In my bedroom, the worst. My journal splayed open, its spine begging. A lipstick-ringed glass sat beside the page where I wrote about the fear of never being chosen. The evidence, intimate and mundane, stitched a single conclusion. My sanctuary wasn't safe. And if a home can't hold your secrets, it isn't a home. It's a display case for someone else's taking. I called Serena with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. How long were you here? Who else was here? Did you read my journal? She answered in a wounded register she keeps sharpened for occasions like this. I was in a really bad place. My roommates are toxic, I needed quiet, I thought my big sister would understand. Her confession was an apologies negative. Every shape outlined, no substance filled. Before I could reply, my mother was ringing through, then texting, then commanding. Emergency family dinner. Tomorrow. 6 p.m. sharp. I knew the choreography: pot roast, a speech about temporary setbacks, a solution prepackaged and stamped inevitable. I went anyway. I wore a blazer that fit like certainty. Their house hadn't changed. Porcelain figurines peering from glass cabinets, my father's favored recliner, Serena perched on the arm of the sofa like a cat with a canary feather caught at the lip. Dinner was as tense as drying paint. At dessert, my father set a set of keys between us with ceremony. My keys. We spoke to your building manager at Harbor Towers, he said. He can add Serena to your lease for a few months. It's all arranged. There it was, that old script unfurled on linen. My role highlighted in yellow. Compliant, useful, silent. I looked at their faces and felt a strange, cooling calm. That's funny, I said, because I haven't lived there for 6 weeks. Plates hushed. Serena's smile slid off. What do you mean? My mother whispered as if volume could rewind time. I told them the truth, that I moved out after my home was trespassed, my privacy read aloud to strangers by silence. My mother flapped at the air like smoke might clear. Boundaries, she said, irritated. You and these boundaries. We're family. Healthy families have boundaries, I replied. Unhealthy ones have habits. My father's confusion hardened into anger, his favorite tool. So you've been hiding from us? Protecting myself, I said. Tasted like metal and relief. I drove away and then I broke. Body folded on the couch, grief shaking loose years of swallowed storms. At 1 a.m. I called Tara. She listened to the wreckage and then asked the only question that mattered. What if you stopped playing the role they cast you in? The thought opened like a door I hadn't noticed. On the other side was air. I called in sick for the first time in 3 years and used the day to redraw a map. By noon I was scrolling listings far from Harbor Towers. By evening I had appointments. By the next afternoon I climbed the stairs of a Maple Row walk-up with creaking floors that sang when you crossed them and windows framed by trees that kept their own counsel. The kitchen was narrow, the counters nicked, the light forgiving. The landlord, Mrs. Halley, a widow who smelled of rosemary and old books, handed me a pen with an approving little hum. I signed. The ink didn't feel like ink. It felt like oxygen. I set about disappearing like a professional. New bank at a credit union across town. Mail redirected to a post office box. Packages to lockers. Passwords changed. A quiet note to HR. Updated contact details. I told exactly 3 people where I lived. Tara, my colleague Jules, and my therapist, Dr. Reeve. I took only what was mine in memory as well as name. My grandmother's leather-worn reading chair, my favorite skillet, a dozen books that taught me how to leave, and clothes that didn't remember being judged. I left the couch, the dining table, the bed frame, things too saturated with old arguments to fit through the new door. I arranged the new place with the care of someone rebuilding cartilage. Plants in the window. A soft ocean green duvet. A desk in an alcove where morning light gathered like water. I slept. I cooked for no reason but pleasure. I invited friends without rehearsing what I'd tell my mother. In therapy I peeled back the joke of independence, and found a wound that had learned to dress itself. Families run on unspoken rules, Dr. Reeve said. You are assigned the role of the one who needs nothing. You're breaking the engine that ran on you. The engine sputtered. My mother's messages shifted from sweet to sharp. My father's from clipped to condemning. Serena's from venom to begging to bargaining. I replied with the smallest spoon possible. 6 weeks passed and my life began to fit like it had been tailored. Book club Wednesdays, volunteer Saturdays, lazy Sundays that didn't end with me counting how many weeks I could avoid dinner. Then the text arrived like a siren. Emergency family dinner. No excuses. 6 p.m. sharp. I took a breath. Boundaries aren't walls. They're doors you can lock and unlock on purpose. I told them I'd be there. I rang the bell instead of using my key, a small, deliberate defection. My mother opened the door with a smile too tight to stay. Since when do you ring? Since I stopped living here, I said, stepping inside. The living room smelled like pot roast and performance. My father pretended to watch the game. Serena scrolled, trying to look bored and not like someone waiting to inherit a life. Dinner tried to be pleasant and failed. After pie, their favorite, not mine, my father delivered the line he'd practiced. Job market's cruel. Rents are worse. We think a temporary solution makes sense. He placed my Harbor Towers keys between the plates again. Serena will use your place until she finds her footing, my mother added. We already spoke to Mr. Hanley. He's fine adding her to the lease. I could have shouted. I could have catalogued the trespasses item by item. Instead, I let stillness do the work. You spoke to my building manager without me, I said, voice steady. You decided where my sister would live without inviting me into my own life. I looked at Serena. You threw a party in my home, read my private words, and called it needing quiet. It wasn't like that, she said, eyes glistening with the old useful tears. It was exactly like that. Then I gave them the truth they couldn't plan around. I moved out 6 weeks ago. I own the apartment. I don't live there. You can return those keys to the table. They don't open what you think they do. Their faces told a whole history in 3 acts. Confusion, denial, anger. My mother reached for the oldest spell. Family doesn't have boundaries. I stood. Healthy families do. And until ours learns, here are mine. You don't get my address. You don't get my keys. You don't get to volunteer my life as the solution to Serena's problems. My father's voice cracked on command. This isn't how we raised you. I know, I said. That's the point. Serena's tears fell for real. Where am I supposed to go? She whispered like a child who'd woken to find the night finally dark. I met her gaze and for once didn't flinch. Where everyone else goes when the net isn't there, forward. I picked up my coat. My mother followed to the door, hands fluttering, trying to catch something already airborne. You can't just walk away from family. I'm not, I said, hand on the knob. I'm walking away from the position you put me in. I love you. I will answer for real emergencies. I will meet on neutral ground. But my home, my peace, my life, those are mine. Outside, Riverton's evening was rinsed clean by a late rain. I drove to Maple Row with my body trembling and my mind clear, climbed 4 flights, and let my key turn in a lock that answered to me alone. For the first time in years, I slept like someone had finally been told the truth and believed it. The first few days after that confrontation felt like standing on a cliff edge. Relief swept through me, powerful, dizzying, but beneath it churned guilt, sharp as broken glass. My father's words replayed on loop. This isn't how we raised you. And my mother's, trembling, family doesn't have boundaries. Their voices lived in my head, tangled with every childhood memory where I had bitten my tongue to keep peace. But at Maple Row the air felt different. I woke without bracing for knocks on my door. I cooked pasta with garlic and basil just because I wanted to. I sprawled across the bed without listening for footsteps. For the first time in my adult life, silence was safety, not punishment. Of course, silence didn't mean freedom from them. My phone buzzed relentlessly, calls stacked like bricks. My mother's voicemails grew increasingly frantic. Maya, honey, we're worried about you. Maya, please call us back. My father's messages dripped accusation. Family doesn't just vanish. Serena's were unpredictable storms. Sometimes begging, sometimes blaming, sometimes pretending as though nothing had happened. Dr. Reeve reminded me in therapy, when you shift the role you've been cast in, expect the system to fight back. That system was rattling every chain it had. So I tried something new, ignoring. Each ignored call felt like loosening a shackle. Each unanswered plea, a rehearsal in self-respect. And yet guilt slid in at night, whispering that maybe I'd gone too far, maybe I was selfish. I told myself what Tara told me after one of Serena's tantrums. Selfish is their word for you refusing to bleed for them. It became a mantra. Selfish was survival. Boundaries were oxygen. Silence was healing. And I was learning shakily how to breathe for myself. Sunday used to be automatic. My body clock would drag me to their table 40 minutes down the highway like I was still bound by invisible chains. But now on Sundays I built new rituals. One evening I lit candles and cooked curry from scratch, filling the apartment with spice instead of silence. Another Sunday I walked the trails at Riverside Park, crunching leaves beneath my boots, listening to nothing but the rhythm of my own footsteps. The ache of missing family dinners was real, but slowly it shifted. What I once called belonging, I began to recognize as performance. Their absence carved space for others. I joined a book club at a small independent store downtown. The women there didn't know my family's script. They just knew I had opinions about novels and a laugh that startled me with how unguarded it sounded. On Saturdays I volunteered at a food pantry. The gratitude in strangers' eyes felt warmer than the hollow applause I'd begged for at home. Evenings I invited friends like Tara or Jules to sit cross-legged on the rug with takeout containers, the air thick with laughter instead of judgment. Once Tara studied me over a carton of noodles and said, "You look lighter. Like someone untied something around your chest." He was right. The weight was lifting. But of course the storm wasn't gone. My phone was still a battlefield. Serena's texts lurched from rage to pleading. "You've always been jealous of me." Then hours later, "I have nowhere to go. Just tell me where you live, I won't tell Mom." I didn't answer. The silence was brutal but necessary. Because I'd learned this. Every time I answered, I handed her the keys again. And I wasn't ready to hand over my peace. 5 weeks after the night of the keys, I agreed to meet my parents, but on neutral ground. No porcelain figurines watching me from cabinets, no walls saturated with old rolls. Dr. Reeve had suggested it. Control the setting and you control part of the dynamic. So I picked a coffee shop halfway between my office and their house. I arrived early, choosing a table near the door so I could leave if I needed to. My hands trembled around the mug until I reminded myself. This isn't an ambush. Not if I choose it. When they arrived, I saw it instantly. They looked older. My father's shoulders hunched like a man shrinking from something too heavy. My mother's smile quivered as though it might shatter. They dressed formally, as if this meeting were a ceremony, as if appearances could patch the fractures between us. The conversation limped along. My mother chattered about gardens and neighbors. My father muttered about gutters and baseball. I shared only surface details. Work projects, a new coffee shop, the weather. We danced around the void. Then my mother broke the script. Tears welled as she whispered, "We miss you. The house feels empty without you." My father shifted uncomfortably, but his words surprised me. Maybe we took your independence for granted." For the first time in decades, I heard something close to accountability. I told them the truth. "You confused capability with not having needs." I stopped asking because I knew you wouldn't meet them. They didn't argue. They didn't deny. My father only stared at his coffee and my mother dabbed at her eyes. When she asked, "Can you forgive us?" I said softly, "Forgiveness is a process. Not a switch. I'm working on it." It wasn't reconciliation. But it was something new. The first crack in the wall they'd built between who I was and who they needed me to be. After that meeting, communication reopened cautiously, thin like a thread I could snap at any time. My mother texted about recipes and cousins. My father sent brief updates about neighborhood projects. I replied, measured, polite, but I never told them where I lived. Serena, though, was absent. Weeks passed before she finally sent a message unlike her usual storms. "I started therapy. My therapist says I should apologize when I'm ready." "I'm not ready, but I wanted you to know I'm working on it." It stunned me. For the first time, she wasn't twisting the narrative, wasn't demanding or blaming, just admitting something was broken. I typed back slowly, "I'm proud of you for taking that step." Meanwhile, my life in Maple Row grew roots. I befriended Zoe, the kindergarten teacher down the hall, whose laugh made bad days dissolve. She introduced me to her circle of friends. Artists, nurses, a musician who strummed in the courtyard on Sundays. I joined the community garden, kneeling in the dirt with strangers who taught me how to coax herbs from the soil. At work, I earned a promotion, this time not just for reliability but for creativity, for ideas that carried weight. For once, my worth wasn't measured against Serena's failures or successes. It was measured against nothing but my own. I discovered parts of myself I had buried. I signed up for pottery and clay melted into bowls beneath my hands. I joined a hiking group that found trails in forgotten parks. I even began writing again, short stories that carried whispers of my past, but with endings I chose. The life I was building wasn't grand. It was quiet. It was mine. And for the first time when I looked at the mirror, I saw not just survival, but possibility. 6 months after that night at the dinner table, I invited my parents to a restaurant near Maple Row. It was deliberate, close enough for me to show them my neighborhood, distant enough to protect my walls. We ate politely like diplomats negotiating fragile peace. Afterward, I walked them to my building. I didn't invite them inside, but I let them see the brick facade, the windows glowing warm. My father studied it with approval. "Good neighborhood." My mother squeezed my hand. "If you're happy, that's what matters." Their words didn't erase the years of imbalance, but for once they didn't dismiss me. And that was enough for now. Serena's path back was slower. Months of therapy softened her edges, and one day she asked to meet. Her apology wasn't vague. She listed the ways she'd crossed my boundaries, admitted to using me, acknowledged the pain she had caused. It was the first time I believed her sincerity. We began cautiously: coffee shops, walks in the park, meetings with start and end times. I never let her near my apartment. Boundaries still mattered. But slowly, trust stitched itself in thin, fragile lines. Life was still messy. There were moments my parents slipped back into old habits. Moments Serena's tone carried echoes of entitlement. But I was different. I no longer collapsed under guilt. I no longer bled myself dry to be the capable one. I had rewritten the script. Some nights I sat on my balcony watching the courtyard lights flicker against the trees, and I marveled at the quiet. It wasn't just silence. It was peace earned. Because sometimes the bravest love you can show your family is the love that begins with yourself. The love that says, I will not vanish so you can survive. I will exist fully even if it means you must change too. And for the first time I believed that was enough. The weeks after Serena's apology felt like walking on unfamiliar ground. Soft enough to sink in, yet sturdy enough to carry weight. We began with guarded steps. She invited me to coffee at a downtown cafe where the windows steamed against the cold. She arrived early, a small miracle in itself, and for once she didn't dramatize her lateness because she wasn't late. I owe you more than an apology, she said, staring at her untouched latte. I owe you recognition. The word startled me. Serena, the master of blame shifting, was admitting responsibility. She listed specifics: taking my clothes, crashing in my apartment, reading my journal. Her voice cracked when she admitted she'd turned my sanctuary into her escape hatch. It wasn't fair, she whispered. I knew it even then. But I leaned on you because you never said no. I looked at her, and for the first time I saw not a rival, not a thief of affection, but a deeply flawed human grappling with herself. It didn't erase the hurt, but it pried open a window to empathy. Still, empathy didn't erase boundaries. Thank you for saying that, I told her. But rebuilding will take time. My apartment, my privacy, that's off limits. This is about us, not my home. He nodded, surprising me again. I get it. I don't want your space. I just don't want to lose you. For the first time in years I believed her. We parted with no grand reconciliation, but with something better. The possibility of a new beginning, however fragile. As I walked home, the winter air biting my cheeks, I realized that forgiveness wasn't a lightning strike. It was a slow thaw, 1 inch of ice at a time. And maybe, just maybe, spring was possible. Meanwhile, my relationship with my parents tiptoed along its own fragile bridge. They wanted me back at Sunday dinners. I refused. I met them on neutral grounds: cafes, diners, a park bench when the weather allowed. Each encounter was a test of whether they could respect the boundaries I laid like guardrails. My mother slipped most often. Why don't you just tell us where you live? She'd ask, feigning casual interest. I'd smile and redirect. Not yet, Mom. My father tried subtler tactics, hinting about how family life would be easier if everyone lived close. I responded with silence, letting the weight of his suggestion collapse on its own. And yet something was shifting. My mother's chatter about recipes turned into hesitant acknowledgments of past missteps. Once, over pancakes at a diner, she sighed and said, I suppose I did spend more time at Serena's recitals than at your debates. I just thought you didn't need me there. Her words sliced and soothed all at once. I wanted to scream, I did need you, but I only nodded. Baby steps, Dr. Reeve reminded me. Healing is incremental, never instant. One evening, my parents came to Maple Row for dinner at a nearby restaurant. Afterward, I walked them past my building but didn't invite them in. My father looked up at the brick facade and said, Good choice. Feels safe. My mother squeezed my arm and whispered, If you're happy, that's enough. For once I believed her. Not entirely, but enough to let the words sit instead of pushing them away. Trust, like forgiveness, was no longer something I chased. It was something they had to earn. And for the first time they seemed willing to try. My new life blossomed in ways I hadn't expected. I wasn't just surviving, I was expanding. I joined a pottery class and found solace in shaping clay, in molding bowls that wobbled imperfectly but carried my fingerprints like signatures. I began hiking with Zoe and her friends, discovering state parks that stretched out in silence and pine. The air smelled different in those forests, untouched, unjudged. I also wrote. At first it was fragments, lines scribbled between work calls, half-formed stories whispered to my journal. Slowly they became essays, then short stories. Stories of girls who broke free of chains, women who discovered they didn't need permission to breathe. Writing felt like unlocking a voice I had buried under years of silence. Even at work the shift was palpable. I earned a promotion, this time not for being reliable, but for being bold. My boss praised my creativity, my ability to lead campaigns that didn't just meet expectations but exceeded them. For once I wasn't the background character. I was the protagonist. Sometimes I still felt pangs of guilt, echoes of my father's accusation. What kind of daughter hides from her family? But I countered them with Tara's mantra. Selfish is their word for you protecting yourself. I thought back often to that night at the dinner table, the keys glinting between us, the silence that followed my declaration. That silence had been terrifying then. Now it felt like the beginning of my life. Because the truth was this, by saying no to them I had finally said yes to myself. Still, the battles weren't over. Serena backslid. She texted late one night. Can I crash at your place? Just this once. I promise I'll leave everything untouched. I stared at the message for a long time before typing. No. I love you, but that's a boundary I won't cross. Minutes later another message arrived, dripping guilt. I can't believe you'd abandon me. You've changed. I set the phone down and walked away. My heart ached, but my conviction didn't waver. I had changed, and that was the point. The next day she sent an apology, admitting she'd tested me, half hoping I'd crumble into the old pattern. I didn't respond. Not every plea required an answer. My parents also faltered. My mother once tried to slip Serena into a lunch unannounced, hoping we'd patch things up in her presence. I excused myself halfway through, leaving my mother flustered and Serena sulking. Later I texted, "Don't put me in situations I didn't agree to. That's manipulation, not love." To my surprise, my mother didn't argue. She only wrote back, "I'm sorry. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't even close." But each time I held the line, I felt my spine straighten, my breath deepen. Boundaries were no longer defenses. They were declarations. The difference was that now, when guilt came knocking, I didn't open the door. I let it stand outside, banging until it tired itself out. And in the quiet that followed, I found something priceless. Peace. 6 months turned into a year. My life in Maple Row grew roots so deep that I could no longer imagine uprooting them. My apartment smelled of rosemary from the plant on my windowsill. My shelves held crooked pottery bowls that made me smile. My Saturdays filled with farmers' markets and community laughter instead of staged family dinners. One evening after a hike, Zoe asked, "Do you ever miss it? The closeness of family dinners?" I thought about it for a long moment. "I miss the idea of it," I admitted. "The version I never really had." She nodded, understanding without prying. The truth was, I had finally accepted something I'd resisted my whole life. I couldn't force my family to be what I needed. I could only decide how much of myself I gave. And I was done giving until there was nothing left. When I finally did invite my parents inside my apartment, nearly a year after moving, they stood in the doorway quietly. My father glanced at the desk in the alcove, the plants dangling in the light. "You've built something good here," he said softly. My mother's eyes shimmered with tears. "It feels like you," she whispered. That was enough. Not absolution. Not perfection. But acknowledgement. As for Serena, progress was slower. But when she finally met me at a cafe and said, "I don't want your apartment, Maya. I just want my sister," I believed her. And in that moment, I realized I wasn't rebuilding the old family. I was building something entirely new, on my terms, with my rules, at my pace. For the first time, I wasn't the forgotten daughter or the capable one. I was simply Maya. And that was finally enough. The first year after I walked away from Harbor Towers was a test of endurance, but the second year became a lesson in rediscovery. I had expected loneliness to shadow me forever, but instead I found companionship in unexpected corners. One Saturday, while kneeling in the community garden, I chatted with Mrs. Alvarez, an older woman who tended sunflowers that towered like guardians. She told me stories of her childhood in Havana, and I told her pieces of mine, carefully, cautiously. She shook her head and said, Mija, family isn't who you're born to. It's who shows up. Her words lodged deep inside me. The work I thrived. The promotion I'd earned gave me a team of my own. I mentored interns, guided campaigns, and for the first time my ideas weren't footnotes. They were the headline. I found myself staying late not out of necessity but out of passion. The same office that once drained me now felt like a place I belonged. Yet the family pull remained. My parents oscillated between respecting boundaries and trying to soften them. My father once asked during a coffee meeting, "When will things go back to normal?" I answered honestly, "Normal never worked for me. I don't want to go back." He frowned but didn't argue. My mother, more subtle, left voicemails about family traditions and holiday gatherings. I skipped some, attended others, always leaving before the conversations turned to Serena's misfortunes. Serena, meanwhile, wrestled with her own journey. Therapy seemed to be helping her, but healing is rarely linear. She apologized, then demanded. She respected boundaries, then tested them. I didn't collapse anymore when she pushed. I simply said no. And each no was a brick in the foundation of the life I was building. For once, my life wasn't about reacting to theirs. It was about shaping mine. The holidays were always the sharpest test. The 2nd December in Maple Row, I sat staring at a text from my mother. Christmas Eve dinner as always. Family only. The words triggered a pang that felt like a bruise pressed too hard. Family only. It had always meant Serena at the center, me orbiting quietly on the edges. I debated not going at all, but Dr. Reeve reminded me, "You don't have to attend on their terms. You attend on yours. Decide what you want from the evening and let that guide you." So I went. I wore a crimson sweater that made me feel powerful, not festive. I arrived late on purpose, left my coat draped over my arms so they knew I wouldn't stay long. The house was unchanged. The porcelain figurines, the smell of pine candles, Serena's laughter carrying from the kitchen like old echoes. When she saw me, she froze, then smiled, hesitant but genuine. "Why, you came." Dinner was tense but civil. My parents tried to orchestrate closeness, but I refused to perform. When Serena passed me the breadbasket, our eyes met. Something unspoken moved between us. Not forgiveness, not entirely, but acknowledgement. I left after dessert, my mother fluttering at the door, my father giving a stiff hug. Driving home, I realized I didn't feel shattered. I didn't feel erased. I felt steady. It wasn't the Christmas I once longed for, full of warmth and laughter. But it was a Christmas where I existed as myself, not as a shadow. And that was enough. The new year brought change in unexpected ways. Zoe, my neighbor-turned-friend, convinced me to join her hiking group on a winter trek. I nearly backed out, afraid of slowing everyone down, but she insisted. The trail was icy, the air sharp enough to sting, but when we reached the overlook, the city sprawled beneath us, glittering under snow. I felt small, and for once being small didn't feel like being invisible. Later, by a campfire, someone asked what I did for fun. For the first time in years, I had an answer. I write. It slipped out before I could censor it. The group leaned in with curiosity, not judgment. "Stories?" one asked. "Yes," I said. "Stories about people who find strength where they never thought it existed." Their encouragement lit a spark. Back home, I pulled out my half-finished pieces and began to finish them. Writing wasn't just an outlet anymore. It was a reclamation. Every sentence reminded me that my voice mattered, even if it had been ignored for years. Meanwhile, Serena texted more cautiously. She'd started a part-time job at a bookstore and sent me a photo of her stacking shelves. "Not glamorous," she wrote, "but it's mine." I surprised myself by replying, "I'm proud of you." We weren't healed. But we were trying. And as I pressed send, I realized something profound. Healing didn't mean erasing the past. It meant building something stronger on top of it, layer by layer. Spring came to Maple Row in bursts of green. My balcony bloomed with herbs, basil, mint, rosemary, plants that thrived because I tended them, not because someone else demanded it. I found joy in these small rituals, proof that nurturing didn't always mean depletion. My parents visited again, this time at my invitation. I cooked them dinner in my tiny kitchen. Simple pasta, salad, bread from the local bakery. They sat at my thrifted table, visibly uncomfortable at first, as though unused to me being the host. But slowly they relaxed. My father complimented the sauce, my mother praised the plants by the window. It wasn't a grand reconciliation, but it was progress. When my mother reached for my hand as she left, she said softly, "You've made something beautiful here." For once I believed she meant it. Serena's progress wavered. She called one night in tears after a breakup, asking if she could stay, just for tonight. My chest tightened, the old urge to rescue rising. But I took a breath and said, "No. I'm here to talk but not to house you." She cried, but she didn't scream. And the next day she thanked me. That was new. It was proof that boundaries, once respected, can teach others how to grow. By the time my second summer in Maple Row arrived, I was no longer just surviving family. I was building a life that stood apart from them. I had a circle of friends who filled my weekends with laughter. I had hobbies that lit me up instead of drained me. I had a career where my name carried weight. And I had a home that no longer felt like a refuge from storms, but a place where joy lived freely. One night, sitting with Tara on the balcony, she raised a glass of wine and said, "Do you realize how far you've come?" I thought back to Harbor Towers, to Serena rifling through my journal, to my parents handing her my keys as though I didn't exist. I thought back to the sobs that racked me that night I finally broke down. "Yes," I said quietly. "I've come far. And I'm not going back." Because the truth was simple. I had finally chosen myself. And that choice had transformed everything. By the third year, my new life felt less like an escape and more like a foundation. The edges of grief had softened into something manageable, though they never disappeared. Sometimes, on quiet nights, I still wondered what it would have felt like to grow up in a home where love was given freely and equally. But then I'd look around my Maple Row apartment. The plants thriving in the windows, the books stacked in uneven towers, the pottery bowls crooked but mine, and I realized I had built the kind of home I always wanted. Still, reminders of the old wounds lingered. A family wedding pulled us all together again. I arrived with my boundaries stitched tight, prepared for awkward smiles and sidelong comments. Serena approached me during the reception, her hair curled, her dress shimmering, but her eyes softer than I remembered. "Do you think we'll ever really fix this?" she asked. Her voice carried a weight I hadn't heard before. I paused, sipping water to gather my thoughts. Fix? Maybe not. But rebuild? Possibly. Piece by piece. She nodded, relief flickering in her expression. We danced once, laughing awkwardly when we stepped on each other's toes. It wasn't the sisterhood I once longed for, but it was real. And real was better than perfect. That night, driving home, I felt something unexpected. Hope. Not hope that things would magically return to what I once wished for, but hope that maybe we could create something new from the ashes. One summer afternoon, Zoe dragged me to a writing workshop at the community center. I resisted at first, convinced my stories weren't worth sharing. But surrounded by strangers, I read aloud a piece about a girl who built walls around her heart because her family left her out in the cold. My voice shook, but when I finished, the room was silent in the best way. Listening, absorbing. An older man in the group leaned forward and said, "That story's going to save someone, you know." I swallowed hard. No one in my family had ever said my words mattered. Hearing it from a stranger felt like light breaking through stained glass. After the session, Zoe hugged me. "You've got to keep writing," she said. And so I did. I filled pages with characters who fought for their freedom, who found voices in places they weren't supposed to. Writing became not just therapy but purpose. Meanwhile, Serena surprised me with consistency. She held her bookstore job longer than I expected. She didn't ask for money or favors. Instead, she sent occasional photos. A new display she'd curated, a stack of novels she was excited to read. It was small, but it was progress. Our relationship was like my pottery bowls. Wobbly, imperfect, but still capable of holding something. Holidays remained the hardest test. Thanksgiving rolled around and my mother begged me to attend. "Just one dinner, Maya. That's all." I went, but this time on my terms. I drove separately. I kept my visit short. I spoke up when conversations tilted into favoritism. When my mother fussed over Serena's hard year, I gently reminded her that my year had been hard too, but fulfilling. My father frowned, uncomfortable with the shift in narrative, but he didn't shut me down. At the table, Serena raised her glass. "To Maya," she said, her eyes steady on mine. "For finally teaching me what boundaries actually mean." The room went silent. My parents exchanged looks, uncertain. But I smiled, warmth threading through me. It wasn't vindication, it was validation. And it didn't come from their approval but from Serena's acknowledgement. Driving home under the cold November sky, I realized something important. I no longer needed my parents to see me. I saw myself clearly now. And that was enough. As winter deepened, my writing began to gather momentum. I submitted a short story to a local literary magazine, certain it would be rejected. Weeks later, an email arrived. "We'd love to publish your piece." I read the words 3 times, tears blurring the screen. All those years of being the forgotten daughter, the one who faded behind Serena's spotlight, and now my words would live in print. I shared the news cautiously. Tara screamed with joy, Zoe bought champagne, Jules sent flowers. Even Serena texted, "Proud of you, sis." My parents' reaction was quieter, more uncertain. "That's nice," my father said, like he didn't quite understand the significance. But my mother, voice trembling, told me, "I always knew you were special." It wasn't the thunderous applause I once craved, but it was something. And perhaps that was enough. The night the magazine arrived in the mail, I held it like proof. Proof that even overlooked daughters can carve their names into the world. Proof that survival can turn into creation. Proof that my story mattered. By the time spring returned, the cycle had shifted for good. My parents still stumbled, Serena still faltered, and I still wrestled with guilt on bad days. But the difference was this: I no longer bent until I broke. I stood. One evening, as I sat on my balcony watching the sunset spill across the courtyard, Serena called. Her voice was quiet, steady. "I'm moving into my own place next month. Not mom and dad's help. Just me." My heart swelled. "That's amazing," I said. "I wouldn't have believed I could do it if you hadn't shown me how," she admitted. For the first time I felt not like her rescuer but her mirror, someone she could learn from without taking from. As we hung up, I realized this was the ending I hadn't expected. Not a perfect family, not healed scars, but a life that was truly mine. Sometimes love means staying. Sometimes it means leaving. And sometimes it means drawing a line so clearly that everyone finally learns where you end and they begin. I had spent years trying to earn a place in my family. In the end, I built one for myself. And that, at last, was enough.